The more I research, the more concerning it is. Suicide by police and shootings being the #1 cause of death in children, mostly by males. What can we do to fix this? Story 1. When I was in the army, if you injured yourself during training or whatever, they got you all the medical care needed to get you back to duty. All the while, you were never made to feel less than, because physical injuries were a natural occurrence from what we did. But if you even whispered you were having any kind of emotional struggles or a tough time psychologically, your weapons card was seized, your security clearance suspended, you were placed on restrictive duty, shunned and ostracized by your command, and ridiculed by your peers for being a wimp. Story 2. Loneliness is the greatest scourge in Western society. We took a sensible desire for individual rights and perverted it into an obsession with individual existence. We need to focus on rebuilding social networks. Not the digital kind, but the real flesh and blood kind that humans are designed to operate in. Story 3. What I've been involved in for the last 15 years is men's groups. Single primary parent fathers, fellow veterans, combat and personnel other than grunts, divorced fathers, and single bachelors as well. Some I've helped start, and others I've found and become a part of through networking with others. Guys, we have to be one another's support group. In-person and virtual meetings, open forums, mass text chats, and any other form of male fellowship we can establish. Nobody else is going to do anything but provide lip service. If you see someone struggling, someone hurting, or even just looking lonely, don't be afraid to talk to them. Not feeling alone for even a few minutes can make all the difference. My dad saved my life in 2001. My wife died in 1999, and I left the Marine Corps after 9 years to raise 2 toddlers. It was brutal, and I can't begin to tell you what was in my head. My dad walked into my barn at 10:30 p.m. on May 15, 2001, and found me with half a bottle of whiskey and a loaded .40 caliber gun in my hand. I was done. He drove 2.5 hours on a whim to make sure I was okay. He told me that it wasn't just his job as a dad, but also as a Marine to keep me alive and help me cope. Be the friend that a stranger might need to get him over the hump. Story 4. For me, it's not necessarily men talking about their issues, but more so how men are viewed when discussing their issues. It's staggering to see how men are perceived when they're with children. I've known men who have taken their own lives because they've been denied access to their children. For example, my elderly neighbor took his little granddaughter to the park, and he remarked how a group of girls kept leering at him and calling him a pedophile. Story 5. So an interest in our lives. I come home and nobody asks anything, nobody says hi. On the rare occasion I am asked how work went, I'm allowed to say, fine, and then I sit and listen to every detail of everyone else's day. Story 6. Bowling leagues. If you have to roll in the semifinals on Tuesday, suicide is not an option. The real answer is community and friends. These fellows need to interact with people. Story 7. Lack of purpose. Is this boring office job really all I'm going to be? No, I can't be whoever or whatever I want. I either do my job and get by or lose my house, lose my car, lose everything. I don't come for money. I have no safety net. It's literally do or die. And sometimes I contemplate the latter. The world needs to change. We're just slaves to the system, making someone else's dreams come true, making someone else millions. I don't hate my job and I'm compensated very well. Don't get me wrong. But daily I think, is this really it? Is this really what I was born for? Sometimes I wish I was never born at all. Story 8. Men tend to flourish when they have a purpose, a clearly defined role, and a social life. Modern society seems geared toward undermining men as much as possible. But do not expect society to change. Instead, you should take an active hand yourself. Make friends with other men. I moved into a new apartment when I was 23. I was living alone without roommates. I noticed one of my neighbors also lived alone, and he was only a couple of years older than me. So, I invited him over to my place for a scary movie marathon for Halloween and handing out candy to kids who wanted to trick or treat. He accepted my invitation, and then he brought a large amount of pizza and beer with him. He also brought some extra candy and a few cheesy Halloween decorations for my front door. We did not have very many trick-or-treaters. which meant the few we did have got triple handfuls of candy. But the beer, pizza, and scary movies flowed freely. So did our conversation. Yes, we were the ones who talked over the movie. Turns out, my neighbor and I had a lot in common. He loved old-school Star Trek just like me, and he liked a lot of the same bands that I did. We became pretty good friends. Eventually, it got to a point where neither of us locked our front doors anymore after coming home from work, and the other guy would just let himself in like neighbor friends do on TV, because we were low-key tired of unlocking our doors for each other. I later found out he was depressed over his lack of friends, not clinical depression, just weighed down by loneliness. That is when I remembered how hard he tried to always make positive impressions with me. He brought the beer, pizza, and candy for Halloween that I never even asked for, and then he said I might have saved him from something bad. It was hard to relate to all that because I have never experienced loneliness. I literally do not know how it feels, and I am always perfectly happy to be alone. I only invited him over to my place because he seemed all right as apartment neighbors go. What I learned is that sometimes just extending a hand of friendship to another man can do a lot for him and maybe for you too. So, do not expect society to do this for you. Invite a man to hang out with you if you think you might be able to make friends with him. You might be surprised at how badly he needs it. Story 9. Something I think would help is not to treat anger as a universally unacceptable emotion to express. Many things in modern life should be angering men and women for that matter, but people jump to invalidate a person's anger at the first chance because they are trying to avoid the worst manifestations of that particular emotion, hurting others, and all they are really doing is causing what they're trying to avoid. Bottling that anger up, especially when it is entirely justified, is not healthy at all, and that's all that ever seems to be encouraged. Story 10. Mental health really needs to be a focus in schools. Here in the United Kingdom, it's literally not brought up until you have a meltdown in the school. Even then, they bring your parents in and tell them to sort it out unless it's bullying, etc. Story 11. Society would need to start caring about men's issues and stop attacking or shaming the male gender. The best we get is fake posts about men need to share feelings more. Most men know this rarely goes well. All our society sees is the men at the top. Men at the bottom are disposable. Story 12. So many things can be done. Tired of having this conversation and no one in control does anything about it. Socialized healthcare, better wages that match living expenses, decreasing the wealth gap, making it so people can live comfortably. Nobody wants to be a slave to the system, and as long as the rich keep hoarding their wealth and the poor keep getting poorer, these numbers will continue to increase. Give any creature poor living conditions, they will die off somehow. Humans fortunately can end their suffering when they choose. Story 13. Male space. Men make each other better when participating in activities, even if competitive. Do some actual things with other men, only men. Go fishing, make a campfire, bowl, rent some off-road vehicles. Don't allow women to partake in your male bonding groups. Story 14. The Men and Boys Are Not All Right is a recent installment of Ezra Klein's podcast. In it, he interviews researcher Richard Reeves about a whole host of issues negatively impacting men, and some proposals for how to address them. It's worth a listen. Story 15. Where do you get your statistics from? The leading cause of death in the United States among men between 20 and 44 is unintentional injuries, with almost 40% according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, with suicide following at 14%. This is also similar for women. The ages between 1 and 19 are much worse. While unintentional injuries remain the leading cause, the suicide numbers rise to 26.3% in comparison to 15% for women. Story 16. Maybe cats. My cats are the only reason why I still live. But I don't think anything else can. Mental health facilities are useless. They either point you to a therapist who would suggest praying to God, or to a psychiatrist who would fail to explain the diagnosis and say that he cannot do anything else after the first antidepressant prescribed had no effect. Governments don't care if you can't find a job. You can always live on the streets and beg for food or something. If anything, they will use you as cannon fodder in war against your will, regardless of your ability to fight, just because you were born with the wrong set of genitals. When you ask for help, you are either ignored or told to Suck it up and start acting like a man. I asked for help, just for advice, many times in various places, including Reddit, and most of the time my requests were simply downvoted to make sure I wouldn't get any help. And there is also the dating world, where you will be treated like garbage until you prove that you are worthy of interaction. If you are a man, you don't deserve sympathy, affection, or love unless you can provide people you want to be with resources. But if love and affection is the only thing you have to give, then you are less than human for the majority of people around you. There is nothing really to hope for except for your life not to be long. Story 17. Honestly, as 25 to 34-year-olds generally speaking, do not die of natural causes. This one will probably always be up there. Depression is common and frequently undiagnosed and untreated. Story 18. We are lonelier than ever before. People tell us to talk about our issues, but then a lot of the time they get uncomfortable when we show our vulnerability. We are constantly criticized by the media and radical feminists, no matter what we say or do, and trying to date nowadays is like clearing a minefield with a hammer. Story 19. Most men are average or below average. They lead unremarkable lives. They are expendable at work and at home, mostly ignored by women unless they have something to offer, constantly reminded of how they're inferior to more accomplished men. The vast majority of men will mostly be average and will accomplish little of note. Things like religion, which values the soul of a person no matter their station in life, make this reality more palatable. This aspect of religion has not really been replicated for men in modern secular society. Story 20. I am doing my senior high school years. What I have found is that many of my peers are fatherless, myself included. Out of 200 people in my cohort, there are 70 students selected for an award at the end of the semester. Only around 20 boys are included. I have noticed more and more girls-exclusive clubs and programs starting up, especially for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Although it is a great thing to include more women in these fields, the boys are left to pursue pre-university STEM-related activities in their own time. I remember talking to my friends about their future jobs. They pretty much all wanted to be an engineer, architect, scientist, and so on, but this divide only persuaded the aspirational men to want to become tradesmen. There is nothing wrong with a trades job, but their main reason was that it was just easier. This is an educational gap where only the men at the top are recognized, but the middle and lower performing men fall short. You can see this as more university graduates are women, while men fall behind. What does this gap mean? It means there is less sense of purpose. From a nihilistic perspective, why continue to live without a purpose? Traditional families had a father being the breadwinner that guided the sons. The modern man, such as my mates, grew up fatherless. They are lost, with no purpose and no pathways for the future. Not saying trades are a bad pathway. It is great that the family structure is evolving, shifting the breadwinner from the man to a balanced role. However, this cycle of hopelessness and uselessness is affecting young men as they do not have a purpose. I remember something vague about suicide letters written by men before their death by Fiona Chan. The top two words were useless and worthless. To change this, we must find the root, which is our education system. Encourage not only girls but boys as well in school clubs. Stop the stigma that university is the only way forward in life. Rather, emphasize vocational training and apprenticeships as another option, allowing boys to choose based on aspiration rather than opportunity. This gives them purpose, an outlook that they have something to work and continue for, a reason to live. Story 21. Support unions, support pro-worker legislation, and support a social safety net. There are lots of problems in the world, but financial insecurity makes everything worse. If I'm going bankrupt because I got sick and it would take 7 lifetimes to pay off the bill at my $7.25 per hour job, I'm going to spiral. I don't want to minimize the influence of toxic standards of masculinity forcing us to keep our problems bottled up, but that isn't something we can meaningfully change as individuals. Unionizing and voting conservatives out of office is something that individual people can actually work towards. The statistics are crystal clear. Places with better social security have better mental health. Story 22. Stop pretending that you can criticize a man any way you want and that it's his job to just endure it. Say something negative about a woman or a minority, and you're a monster. Say it about a man, and he's judged as a problem if he pushes back on whatever you've said about him or accused him of. Story 23. Not much, everything is too layered at this point. It's a society thing, we are a mentally ill society. It's probably evident that most men see the future as the clear dystopia it is becoming. They have no purpose and they have no hope. I got out of my suicidal depression, and I still think the world is bad. Story 24. Unfortunately, nothing can be done because our society cannot address, fix, handle, or solve anything without being idiotic about it. If anything, we will continue to see suicide rise, men turning to radicalized groups, violence or disassociation, and increased use of alcohol and drugs. Society does not pay attention to ordeals until the violence starts. Story 25. Normalize more male-only time. Men are tribal and exclusive by nature, and we need time away from society's and women's pressures. Having places where guys can go and just be around other men, whether it's gaming, sports, discussions, or whatever pursuit they want to participate in, is important. However, it should be a male-only environment. If there were things like summer camps for adult men where they could take a week off and just relax in an all-male environment, it would go a long way toward their mental and emotional health and help them be more able to cope with life's pressures when they return.